Good morning and welcome back to the Extra Point here on ESPN Denver 1600. I'm your host, Roland Rainey, and as always, I'm joined with Justice Gordon from New York, Jeremy Coleman from Indiana, and Robert Parker from New Jersey. Look, there's a lot of great football to talk about, but there were two interesting games last week that captured a lot of attention. So let's jump into the very first one, and that is the Jets playing against the Patriots. Now, we know what their current status is. We know what the quarterback situation is. But I will say that turned out to be a pretty interesting looking game. You had Flacco coming in and, did a fairly decent job. Definitely pushed the ball down the field. And you had Cam at times in the game showing a little bit of the old Cam, getting out to the edges, running. But he tried staying in the pocket a lot and slinging a lot of balls in there. They had a really slow start, picked it back up, and then made a game of it. But when I look at that game and I look at the Jets, they were up and they had total control of that game. What happened, Justice? What happened with the Jets and how did they lose control of that game?
Yeah, when I look at how the Jets played last week, I saw what I've been seeing for the past few weeks, and that's a team who starts off strong and collapses in the second half. Offensively, ever since Gase has given up play calling duties, they've actually looked competent. Joe Flacco, he did a pretty great job filling in for Sam Darnold. I thought he looked a lot better than Sam Darnold has looked all year, except for that fourth quarter interception. The offensive line, I think, is gelling a lot better. With no off season really. Offensive lines this year have taken a little bit longer to gel, but I think they're finally starting to get around to that. Defensively, I could go on for about 20 minutes. I mean, McDougal and Marcus May have been major disappointments. Ashton Davis was in for McDougal because he just went on IR. And I think we need a total rehaul of that cornerback room. None of them are good. Bless Austin, he's a death corner at best. Pierre Desir, that was a terrible signing. And, Quentin Williams, our star D tackle, he was out. And it definitely showed. There was no pass rush, and we completely got shredded in the second half on the ground. The Patriots really took advantage of that. I gotta give props to the Patriots. Cam Newton and the Patriots, they started off really slow, but they took advantage of the Jets' sloppiness when they clawed their way back in the second half, and they took advantage of poor coaching on the Jets' perspective, and they came out with the win.
So you mentioned earlier that Flacco, definitely played well, but coupled with the fact that the offensive play calling is out of the hands of Gase and into someone who definitely showed a little bit of finesse within the offense. It was great to see the little light of Frank Gore out there making it happen in the ring game. But I don't know. Was there a good balance of pass run game? Should they stay? Maybe they should have kept the ball on the ground a little bit longer. Who knows? Instead of trying to air it out. But there were times where they definitely took their shots and made the best out of it. So when I look at a team like that, as you already mentioned, there's promise. But is it the coaching staff, or is it really just having a very inexperienced, not as talented core on the defensive side that is putting way too much pressure on the offense?
I think it's a combination of both, but I would lean heavily towards the coaching. Adam Gase and Greg Williams have done terribly this year. The defense hasn't looked like it was last year. I think Greg Williams should be on his way out with Gase. And Adam Gase, we all know what he is. He's uninspiring. The players don't play for him. That's what. Once he gave up play calling duties, look what the offense has done. They've looked competent. They've moved the ball well. And, I really give my hats off to Flacco. He played really well. He threw for 3 touchdowns. I think it was like 260. You know, he played really well. He showed the veteran experience that we needed. But I mean, this team is just, it lacks talent on defense, and the coaching staff is just terrible.
One thing I'd like to address here is, Adam Gase seems to be taking the brunt of the criticism every week, regardless. I think it's interesting that if the Jets are going to move on from Adam Gase, why haven't they done it yet? This would be the perfect year to do it.
I've been wondering the same thing.
This would be the perfect. Yes, this would be the perfect year to do it, because you can blame COVID, you can blame not having a great, a cohesive off-season plan put together, a bunch of free agents trying to come together on defense, an unhealthy offense. Like, you have every excuse in the book to let Adam Gase go, and they still haven't done it yet. That just surprises me. If you're gonna move on, move on. We've already seen the experiment fail. The longer he stays there, honestly, the more I believe he's going to have that job going into next year.
Why do you think he has not been fired yet? I mean, let's be honest here. You're talking about now granted, the Atlanta Falcons have their own type of issues, but they were definitely quick to get rid of Quinn, and rightfully so. Same thing with the Houston Texans, rightfully so. There are a lot of teams that did not hesitate to pull the trigger. But here we are with a team that has not won a game, not even come close, with the exception of the last game against the Patriots. Why has he not been removed?
I think part of that is the level of expectation, too. I don't think anyone expects the Jets to be this like magically good football team in a manner of an offseason or two, as where at least the Atlanta Falcons were in a Super Bowl 3 years ago, suffered one of the worst defeats in Super Bowl history and one of the most epic comebacks of all time. But the difference is, I feel like Atlanta's never recovered from that. It's like that 28-3 comeback is like stuck with that team. And once they got rid of Dan Quinn, once they got rid of the general manager, I think they're starting to play better under Raheem Morris. Raheem Morris is 3-0 as a head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. I'll give him a lot of credit for bringing that locker room together, getting them to play hard, getting them to produce, actually play some solid defense. But I think the big part of it is expectations. The Jets have had a bad team for really the last 5, 6, 7 years. Like, not a lot of expectations in New York. And as to where I think that's where at least Adam Gase has some leeway. He's trying to create a culture there. It's arguable whether he's been effective at that. Most people would say no. But I think he gets a little bit more of a pass. The general manager went out and signed Le'Veon Bell. He didn't want Le'Veon Bell. So it doesn't seem like the head coach and the general manager are on the same page at the moment. At least they weren't on the same page at the start of their tenure. So maybe they both get another year. Who knows?
Yeah, just to piggyback off of Jeremy's point, you talk about the expectations within that Jets organization, and right now you don't have anything. Right now, all the talk outside of that organization and all the talk in the sports realm is that, they're tanking to get Trevor Lawrence. And, it's been outside talk that Trevor Lawrence might come back to school. But I would just like to, dial this back into the actual game that was played this past Monday night with the Patriots. You tip your hats off to Joe Flacco. He definitely looked like the Joe Flacco of old, going 18 of 25 for 262 yards and 3 touchdowns. And talking about this Jets offense, this is the first game that all of the wide receivers in the Jets, offensive scheme has played. And that's the rookie and Denzel Mims, and then Rashad Perriman and Jamison Crowder. That dime that, Joe Flacco threw to Jamison Crowder on the post corner route, where he's throwing it off his back foot, he throws it perfect, and Jamison Crowder gets his feet in. So, this team has talent, but, I know it probably might be one of the lesser talented teams out there, but they do have talent. They do have pieces. But, just going to this Patriots team, you know, you talk about the Patriots and expectations. Of course, coming into this season, you know, it wasn't that much of an expectation for the Patriots to go back to the Super Bowl. But once again, we talk about this Jets team, you know, whether it's on the offense side or the defense side of the ball with no talent. This Patriots team is right there behind them with no talent as well. Cam Newton is throwing to Jacoby Myers, an ex-quarterback, you know, coming out of high school and played a little bit of quarterback at NC State before he made the transition over to receiver. That's his leading receiver right there. Kind of like what you see with the Eagles with Greg Ward and Carson Wentz. You know, Greg Ward played quarterback in Houston, and then he made that transition over to receiver. So this is the weapons that Cam Newton is dealing with right now. So you can actually make a case to say, hey, the weapons on the Jets offense side of the ball is actually better than the weapons on the Patriots side of the ball. So not a bad win for the Patriots in that sense, if you ask me.
That's not a bad comment there, Robert. And I'm gonna say something, and to the listeners for this episode, they might disagree with me here, and some of you might actually disagree with me. But to me, I always tell folks, you know, the video don't lie. When I watched that game, there was a lot of things that I did not like about what I saw out of Cam Newton. Cam Newton, as a quarterback, as a leader, to generate a sense of synergy and energy within the huddle, he has to be invested. And when he makes a mistake, he internalizes it so much that he does not take the time to help motivate the other folks on the field. There were several times in the huddle, walking up to the line, where he just looked like he was absent-minded, like he was disengaged from what was going on in the actual game. Some of the passes just seemed so far off the mark that I wondered, you know, what is going on with him? And I will say it, ever since he had COVID and he's come back, he has not looked the same at all. And I'm very much wondering what's your guys' take on his performance and whether or not he is the right fit for the Patriots.
Yeah, I agree with you. I thought he looked very spotty at best this past week. He missed a number of throws. One throw was an easy walk-in touchdown late in the third quarter, which was a terrible throw by him. You know, it brings me back to the question we had before, you know, the season started. You know, how would Cam Newton fit into this Bill Belichick system? He's not that drop-back quarterback type player, and he's had to be that player at times this year, and he's just not that player. He's missed throws because of it, and you know that comes with the territory when you put him in Bill Belichick and Josh Daniels' system. You know, it's something, you know, that's hindered this team, and I think it limits them. And I think, you know, the Patriots are very much in play to draft a quarterback this upcoming draft.
Well, one thing I'll say is I don't think it's just Cam Newton. I think if you look around the league with free agent quarterbacks this past year, of course, Cam Newton has had to come into a brand new offense with a lack of an offseason where he couldn't develop chemistry with his weapons. And then right now, his weapons are somewhat hurt. The same thing happened with Phillip Rivers in Indianapolis. Phillip Rivers did not look like the Phillip Rivers that we have seen in the past. It's only been these last few weeks where he started to finally develop a rhythm with his offense that can happen. The same has happened with Tom Brady down in Tampa Bay. I mean, he had one of the most forgettable first games as a Buccaneer as anyone, really. I mean, he was not on the same page with his receivers. And honestly, if you still look at them today, they are still not all on the same page. I think a lack of an offseason has really hurt a lot of these quarterbacks that are coming into new systems. Now, I don't think that's the overall explanation. I don't think Cam Newton is the same player that he used to be, but I do think that plays into a part of it. And him, like Robert pointed out, Jacoby Myers is his top wide receiver right now. There's no N'Keal Harry. There's no Julian Edelman. You know, They don't exactly have the world's greatest offense either.
Yeah, just like I said earlier, I mean, I know Cam Newton is taking the brunt of his blame in regards to the Patriots losing, week in and week out. But once again, if you just look at the numbers, he went 27 to 35 for 274 yards. Of course, he didn't throw a touchdown, but he ran for 2 touchdowns. And just like Jeremy said, he reiterated my point in regards to, the weapons that Cam Newton has around him, which is, no weapons at all. And right now, the Patriots is sitting at 3-5 in the standings. And if you look at a couple of those games, they went down to the wire with the Seattle Seahawks. He was pretty much right there at the goal line. If he goes in, they win that game. And then the other game, they're coming back on the Buffalo Bills team that, we saw just knock off the Seattle Seahawks team, and he fumbles going into, to kind of go up in that game. So right now they're sitting at 3-5, but all the talk is surrounding Cam Newton, and they could be easily 5-3 on the season.
But hey, Robert, here's the point to your actual comment. Yes, you're absolutely right. They could be 5-3, but you just gave the audience the answer to my question. How did they lose those games? They didn't lose the game because of play calling. They lost the game in the hands of Cam Newton. I mean, the things that we expect him to do, in that one loss where he actually fumbled the ball, that is not something normally we see out of him, especially that close on the goal line. I mean, when they're on the goal line, Cam does his Superman thing, right? But he has not been that player. And I do wonder, where is he at mentally as far as fitting into the system, coming back? But I will say this, Cam, you got to step it up. You are the captain. You are the quarterback. You got to get everybody around you excited. You got to infuse a sense of energy into that offense if you are planning on making any type of run for any playoff spot. So you got to get after it, Cam. I'm sorry, buddy, but we'll keep our eyes out on the Jets and Flacco there. That should turn out to be pretty interesting. So, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for listening in to the Extra Point here on ESPN Denver 1600. I'm your host, Roland Rainey, and I'm joined with Justice from New York and Jeremy from Indiana and Robert out of New Jersey. So we've been talking about this Jets and Patriots game because it was very interesting. But let's switch it up and go to another interesting game. And I'm looking at my colleagues right now, and I know this is about to get interesting, my fans. The Steelers went up against a horrible Dallas Cowboys team. So let's bring it out. Let's talk about it. I said it last week. I said it a week before. And I'm going to ask the question again. Based on the performance of the Steelers, Justice, is the Steelers a complete football team?
Jeremy might be mute me on this one because he's not going to like what I have to say. They are not a complete team. I'm going to stick by what I said. I just want to throw off a few stat lines from this year. Week 1, Darius Slayton, 6 receptions, 102 yards. Week 3, Randall Cobb, 4 receptions, 95 yards. Week 5, Travis Fulgham, 10 receptions, 152 yards. Week 7, A.J. Brown, 6 receptions, 153 yards. Week 8, Willie Snead, 5 receptions, 106 yards. This team is a very solid team. It's a powerhouse offensive team. It's a well-coached team, but the weakness has always been the secondary. When I watched the Pittsburgh Steelers this past week, I saw an overconfident team who got caught up in the hype, and they came in and thought they could run through the Dallas Cowboys, and they almost got beat by a fourth-string quarterback in Garrett Gilbert. If this was Dak Prescott on the field with those weapons and how Zeke was running, the Cowboys would have beat them by double digits. They came in just unprepared and overconfident, and they almost got taken down. So, I think Mike Tomlin needs to get in these guys' ears, get them back on track, and get them focused because they cannot come into games playing light and thinking they're going to win because they have 0 losses in the loss column so far.
Well, I'm going to take a very rare thing here. I'm going to agree with Justice to an extent.
Whoa. Wait a
To
minute.
an extent.
Did I hear that you are actually agreeing with Justice right now, Jeremy?
I said to an extent. Let me explain. I will say this. The Steelers have not started off fast. They came in unprepared, and they looked like a team that had not really prepared to play the Dallas Cowboys. They took the record and said, "Oh, we're going to go ahead and win this game." This is actually very typical of the Pittsburgh Steelers, really, the last 5 or 6 years. Mike Tomlin has this team playing very well, but there's always one game a year that Pittsburgh really plays down to the level of their opponent. That was this game this year. I said it all week long. This game was either going to be a blowout or it was going to be one of those nail-biting finishes just like we got on Sunday, and that's exactly what we got. Because Pittsburgh
– that's interesting you mentioned that, Jeremy, because one of the things I brought up before in general conversation is when you have a team like the Steelers and you go up against a really struggling Dallas Cowboys, do you tend to play down to the level of your opponent? Now, we've all heard this phrase, right? And oftentimes you hear it on a basketball court that, hey, you're getting ready to play to the level of these scrubs. And let's call the Dallas Cowboys what they are. Nobody is going to disagree here. They're scrubs right now. And it almost felt like the Steelers woke up and someone said, hey, do we have a football game today? And then someone said, yeah, I think the Cowboys. They did not prepare for these guys because it wasn't something worth preparing for, and it came back and it bit them in the butt. I don't know, Robert. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with everyone. The Pittsburgh Steelers did, sleepwalk through this game. But once again, they definitely should have beat the Cowboys by double digits. But if you just look at the tradition of both, franchises from the Cowboys to the Steelers, you kind of knew this game was going to be a little bit gritty. You didn't think it was going to be this close. But once again, the Cowboys are professional athletes. They get paid just like the Pittsburgh Steelers players. And they actually came out and they tried to prove something. They try to get a win. You tip your hat off to Garrett Gilbert for having a great game. But one thing I disagree with was Mike Tomlin going for it and not selling it for the field goal. I really think he should have kicked the field goal and went up by 8 and have Garrett Gilbert, the fourth string quarterback, pretty much drive the length of the field on the number 1 defense in the NFL. So I think that was a big mistake in Mike Tomlin on, from a coaching perspective. But once again, Big Ben Roethlisberger, you have to give credit to this guy. He's a sure ballot Hall of Famer. And it just seems like him and Juju is coming into their own. And it really seems like Juju Smith-Schuster is coming into that Hines Ward type of role where he's a solid blocker on the outside. He's catching the ball in the middle of the field and getting those tough yards. So I think the Pittsburgh Steelers kind of woke up in that second half. But once again, they're playing for something larger than, a win against the Dallas Cowboys. They're playing for that Lombardi Trophy at the end of the year. And going back to your question about, the Pittsburgh Steelers being a complete team, I know they might struggle in the secondary, to a certain extent. But once again, when those pass rushers get to you, the quarterback's not going to have time to throw the ball. And when Bud Dupree and TJ Watt is dialed in, I'm taking that defense over any defense in the National Football League.
Hey, Jeremy, I want to swing back over to you because you mentioned something that I thought was quite interesting. You said the Steelers always have a game where they almost have to wake up and understand where they are at. So when I look at a game like this, instead of looking at the team and saying they probably should have been a little bit more woke, should the coaching staff, take on a little bit of this responsibility in the fact that they probably should have gotten this teams behind early on in the game to get them riled up and realize that, hey, you are playing against scrubs and you are starting to play like scrubs.
Well, I would say Mike Tomlin would say that it's not his job to motivate these guys. These guys are professionals. They have to come and play and be ready to play week in, week out. One thing I will point out here is that the last 2 weeks, the Steelers have come off very sluggish starts. And it's because the offensive game plan has not worked. What has worked is Ben Roethlisberger calling his own plays practically from the no huddle the rest of the game. Against their game 2 weeks ago against Baltimore, the defense put up the only points in the first half, 7 points. Then, second half, Big Ben goes out there, starts calling his own plays. They score 21 unanswered, end up winning by 4. Look what happened this week. They got off to another sluggish start, and then once Ben Roethlisberger started calling the plays again, they started to finally move the ball. It was basically shotgun the rest of the game, especially since he took that hard hit to the knees from Neville Gallimore, defensive tackle from the Cowboys. It did not look like he was going to be playing under center most of the rest of the game. So the running game pretty much got scrapped at that point. It was on Ben Roethlisberger to win these past 2 games. He has done that. He's answered the call.
Hey, you make a great point, and I will say they did answer the call. It was a close one. I would prefer that it's not a close one against the Dallas Cowboys at this point in the season. That's probably not the team you want to have a close game with, but I do believe they probably had a come to Jesus meeting after that game to realize never, ever to put themselves in a predicament like that ever again. So I think what I got out of this session today is Justice is very much still clear that they're not a complete team. Jeremy conceded just a little bit that potentially they have some areas they can work on. But I think Jeremy still believes that this is the right team at the right time, the right moment to make a great push into the Super Bowl. And I think Robert has captured it all together, right? Despite sometimes the hiccups in the secondary, when you compare them against all the other teams out there, they are the most complete football team. So I think this is just going to end up being a discussion we will have to continue to have, because I don't know if we're going to be able to convince Justice that this team is complete. Maybe we might get there, but remember what I said 3 episodes ago, Justice. If this team goes at least 11-0, we got to come back and revisit this conversation, because they would be 11-0 for a reason. All right. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, you are listening to The Extra Point here on ESPN 1600. And before we wrap up today, doing our 2-minute drill, I have to get into this conversation. Because right now across the nation, we have a serious uptick in COVID cases. And when I go back and I look at that Notre Dame win, congratulations, great win. But the stadium rushing the field, that to me was the ultimate super spreader. I don't know, guys, on this particular topic, what's your take?
I think it was widely irresponsible of the fans, during these tough times. I definitely agree with you there. But I think the Notre Dame football program, the school, they have handled this to the best of their ability and how they should. They saw what had happened. They were disgusted by it. They made it mandatory that every student in the school who was at that game get tested. If they skipped out on testing and went home early, they would have hell to pay pretty much. They would hold back their registration for the following year. And, I think they did all the right things. It was widely irresponsible of the fans. But I think, Notre Dame as a program, they've handled it very well. And as far as an NCAA, fine or a ban of some sort, I just don't think it's necessary. I think they handled it pretty well so far.
I'd have to agree with Justice on that. I think it's unrealistic to think the school could have done much better there. You're not going to get your event and security staff to hold back the hordes of thousands of people emptying out the stands. This, to an extent, this was a measure that they probably should have prepared for, didn't to the best of their knowledge. But being here in Indiana, Governor Holcomb has rolled Indiana back out of phase 5. We are now back into phase 4 because of the uptick in cases. So here in Indiana, it's getting worse too. You know, there's other states that have completely rolled back. Indiana has rolled back to an extent too now. Like Justice said, Notre Dame is holding those students accountable. They're required all of them to get tested to make sure that they are not spreading the virus. Honestly, the biggest disappointment for me is from those fans thinking that they should rush the field. How bad would they have felt after this monumentous victory for the program to beat number 1 Clemson, that if they would have gotten half the team infected with COVID, would they have even been able to put a team out there for the next few weeks? I mean, that's where I'm at. As a fan, I'm thinking, let's not just let this be our Super Bowl. We have college football playoff aspirations. Let's not do anything to damage that. And that's exactly what they did by rushing the field. The whole mob mentality was once one person went, they all went.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Justice and Jeremy in regards to this one. I really think, you know, the school, Notre Dame, actually did a great job of handling, you know, after the fact. But once again, you know, as a fan, it's a great win over a ranked number 1 Clemson team. But at the end of the day, it's a win over a number 1 Clemson team without Trevor Lawrence. So you did beat Clemson, but you didn't beat them with Trevor Lawrence. So if you're going to rush the field, at least rush the field with Trevor Lawrence is on the field and playing, and you beat these guys. But once again, I think Notre Dame did a great job from, you know, from a school perspective of actually, you know, just like Justice says, holding the registration from students that kind of, you know, skipped out on getting tested or whatever like that. But great win for Notre Dame. And I know it was a lot of talk on Twitter and social media that, you know, it was coronavirus versus the Catholics. I thought that was pretty, you know, clever out there. But with that being said, I don't think, you know, storming the field, you know, put an uptick in the corona cases. We have to think about it. A couple of weeks ago, it was just Halloween, and we know how people like to go out and party on Halloween. So that can actually be a catalyst to the upticks of corona cases in these college campuses, is that, you know, these college kids going out to Halloween parties.
Hey, I hear you all, and I think I'm just going to end up being the outlier on this one. I think the Notre Dame staff did a horrible job prepping for this game. I think this is a case where the student body did a horrible job thinking through the action on the back end. I get it. It's a great win, but there is something a little bit larger at stake here. And to Jeremy's point, if you rush the field and this becomes some type of super spreader, now you have the potential of infecting those players. And you have the potential of affecting 2 or 3 games down the road. I think it was very irresponsible of that university. It was irresponsible of the student body. And I really hope that the NCAA could step in at some point and talk to Notre Dame and hold them accountable in some form or fashion. Do I think it's going to happen? No. And okay, yes, I get it. Notre Dame did some things on the back end post the game to try to make up for the buffoonery that took place by rushing the field. These are some very delicate times, and as much as we are all sports enthusiasts, we have to be smart on how we go about this, because the last thing we don't want to have are students or anyone, any person, losing a life for making a boneheaded decision. So with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, the uptick is across the nation right now. So please follow the COVID directives. Continue to hand sanitize. Continue to wear your mask. Continue to social distance as best as you possibly could. And hopefully one day we will get past this pandemic. Once again, thank you for joining us here on The Extra Point. I'm your host, Roland, once again joined by Justice, Jeremy, and Robert, and we are looking forward to next week's episode. We have an extremely special guest coming on, so please stay tuned to some of the announcements coming out, because that is an episode I'm pretty positive you don't want to miss. Have a great week.